tales in a digital sway.
Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that's sparking a lot of debate.
Definitely.
And maybe a bit of nervousness, I think, in the world of research. We're talking about using AI.
Specifically, generative AI.
Right, generative AI in qualitative work.
Yeah, it's such a fast-moving area, isn't it? And, well, bringing powerful new tools like AI into something as, nuanced as qualitative research, it just naturally brings up a ton of questions.
And valid concerns, absolutely.
Totally valid.
And the material we've been digging into for this deep dive, it's actually fantastic because it really gets into the trenches of those common reservations. We're looking at parts of a presentation that directly tackles the worries you might have heard or, felt yourself about bringing AI into your qualitative toolkit.
So think of this as unpacking those concerns. Things like bias, hallucination, data security.
Exactly.
And we're using the insights from this material to understand why they come up, and maybe more importantly, how they can be well understood and maybe even addressed in practice.
Okay, so let's unpack this. One of the core ideas running through this material is that, well, many researchers seem to see AI's role in qualitative research not as a replacement, right? But more as an assistant.
Yeah, that's a key distinction. An assistant.
It's about augmenting the work, not automating the researcher away, even though, the tools definitely still have weaknesses and face plenty of criticism.
Making that distinction right at the start is really important, I think. It sort of reframes the whole conversation. It's not AI doing the research, it's AI helping the human researcher.
Spot on. Okay, now let's jump into the first big reservation that always seems to come up: bias.
Bias. Yeah, always a hot topic with AI, isn't it? I mean, we know these models learn from absolutely massive data sets.
Huge amounts of data.
And if those data sets reflect existing societal biases, could be gender, race, class, whatever the AI, can absolutely pick those up and reproduce them.
And that's a huge concern for qualitative researchers, right? We're usually highly attuned to reflexivity, our own positionality. But what's fascinating in the material we looked at is how it frames AI bias. It puts it in a broader context almost immediately. It brings in this quote from Denson and Lincoln way back in 1994.
Before generative AI was even a twinkle in someone's eye.
Exactly. They wrote, "The researcher as a bricklayer understands that research is an interactive process shaped by his or her personal history, biography, gender, social class, race, and ethnicity." And it goes on, "The bricklayer knows that science is power. There is no value-free science."
Wow, that quote is powerful. It's such a crucial reminder, isn't it? Human researchers, we aren't value-free either.
Not at all.
Our backgrounds, our experiences, our perspectives, they all inevitably shape how we approach things, how we interpret data, what we even notice or don't notice.
Right. And qualitative methods especially demand we acknowledge that reflexivity.
Absolutely.
So the material seems to be implicitly arguing that bias isn't some new problem AI creates out of thin air for research. It's more like it's a dimension of research that AI also participates in, just like human researchers do.
So the challenge isn't this, naive hope of eliminating bias completely, which that quote suggests might be impossible anyway.
Probably is, yeah.
It's more about understanding it's there, being transparent about it, and figuring out strategies to mitigate the impact, whether that's human bias or tool bias.
Exactly. It reframes the whole question from, is AI biased? Because, probably, like humans are.
Right.
To, okay, how do we work with these tools critically, transparently, knowing that bias is a factor in both the human and the AI part of the process?
It's a much more productive question, I think.
Okay, let's move to the second big reservation. Hallucination. I always find that term slightly spooky.
It does sound a bit sci-fi, doesn't it? But it's a key technical challenge. Basically, when an AI is uncertain, or maybe the data it was trained on doesn't quite cover a specific question you ask, it can generate text that sounds perfectly plausible, really confident even, but it's not actually based on fact. It's, made up.
And in qualitative research, that could mean, what? The AI inventing a participant quote, or maybe fabricating a connection between ideas that just isn't there in your data.
Exactly. And that is definitely not something you want happening when you're trying to be rigorous with real participant voices.
Absolutely not. That undermines the whole thing.
But the material we looked at, it does present a technical solution, one specifically designed to fight this problem when you're analyzing your own documents. It's called a RAG system.
RAG.
Like RAG, what's that stand for?
Retrieval Augmented Generation.
Retrieval Augmented Generation. Okay.
And the way it works is actually quite clever. Instead of just relying on its huge general knowledge base, everything it learned during training.
Yeah.
To answer questions about your specific documents, the system first goes and retrieves relevant information directly from those documents you gave it.
Oh, okay. So it actually looks at my interview transcripts or my field notes first before it answers. Precisely. It reads the relevant bits of your uploaded material and uses that as its primary source of evidence before it generates the response.
So the retrieval augmented part means it finds the relevant text in my stuff and then uses its AI smarts based on that text.
You got it. It augments its generation with retrieved evidence. This hugely reduces the chance of the AI just fabricating stuff that isn't grounded in your actual data. It's the technical answer presented in the material for hallucination when you're working with your own documents.
Okay, that makes a massive difference. It's not just guessing based on the whole internet. It's basing its response on my specific text.
All right, anchoring the response in your data. That's the key.
All right, third major reservation. And this one is, well, extremely understandable. Data security.
Oh yeah, critical.
Especially when you're dealing with sensitive research data, participant confidentiality is absolutely paramount. So the idea of uploading that data to an AI, it can feel pretty risky.
It's a huge hurdle for many researchers, and rightly so. And the material makes a really important distinction right up front here. There's a big difference between just, say, pasting your sensitive data into a public chat window like the main ChatGPT website.
Which you probably shouldn't do.
Definitely not. Versus using dedicated applications research software that integrate these large language models, the LLMs, via something called an API interface.
Okay, so the difference between just chatting on the public site versus using, say, research software like ATLS.TI or MXQDA that has built-in AI features.
Exactly. And the material focuses on how those integrated applications handle the data. It explains that when you use an AI feature in one of these tools, your data gets transferred over that API interface.
An API, like a secure bridge.
Think of it like that, yeah. A secure channel that lets the research software talk to the AI model.
Yeah.
Your application uses a unique key, an API key, to send the data through this bridge.
Okay, and how is that transfer protected? Is the bridge secure?
Well, the material states the data travels through this kind of virtual tunnel, and during that transmission, it's typically encrypted, specifically with 256-bit encryption.
256-bit encryption. Okay, that sounds pretty strong. But, how strong is it really? Is it just jargon?
It's definitely not just jargon. The material gives some, frankly, mind-boggling numbers to illustrate this. It calculates that breaking 256-bit encryption, even if you could test 1 trillion keys every second.
1 trillion a second? Wow.
Would take roughly 3.68 times 10 to the power of 57 years.
Okay, my brain just broke trying to comprehend that number. Can you put that in perspective?
The material does. The age of the entire universe is estimated at about 13.8 billion years. That's 1.38 times 10 to the 10 years.
Right.
Breaking 256-bit encryption would take, well, vastly, vastly longer than the universe has even existed. They'll be like 10 to the 47 times longer.
Okay, so basically impossible with current or even imaginable technology.
From a computational standpoint, yeah, it's considered completely infeasible. The material even shows a little chart comparing it to older, weaker encryption, and the difference is just astronomical.
Wow. That really drives home the strength of the encryption method itself while the data is in transit.
It highlights that the encryption of the data during transmission is incredibly robust. But, and this is important, the material doesn't just stop there. It then asks this crucial question: is the problem then rather the trust in servers, infrastructure, and operators?
Right. So the tunnel might be super secure, but what about where the data ends up, the systems, the people managing them?
Precisely. And this is where the material really emphasizes that technical security measures, like encryption, have to be layered with procedural and legal safeguards.
Okay, like what?
It stresses the vital role of confidentiality agreements when you're using AI tools in research. And it details the key things these agreements really need to cover.
What kind of things should be in there?
It's pretty comprehensive. Things like clearly identifying who's involved, the data owner, the AI provider, defining exactly what information is, confidential raw data, protocols, analyses, even the AI's own reports.
The AI outputs too.
Yes. Specifying what the AI provider can do with the data. Only use it for the research task. Conditions for any disclosure. How long the confidentiality lasts. Details on data handling, storage, processing, encryption, access controls,
Okay.
whether anonymization or pseudonymization is used, and the details of that. Explicitly mentioning the use of AI tools. What happens to the data afterwards, return or secure destruction. Exclusions, like if the info is already public. What happens if disclosure is legally required? Making clear no ownership is transferred. And crucially, the consequences if the agreement is breached.
Wow, okay, that's a serious legal framework needed to back up the tech.
It really is. And the material also touches briefly on anonymization and pseudonymization as strategies you might use before even sending data to an AI.
Right, making the data less identifiable.
Exactly. It clarifies anonymization aims to make identification practically impossible. Pseudonymization replaces identifiers, but the data can potentially be linked back with extra info.
So still needs protection.
Absolutely. The material makes the crucial point that pseudonymized data still falls under strict data protection laws, precisely because re-identification is possible. Important distinction.
Very important. And did it mention something about offline tools as well?
Just briefly, yeah. For something like transcription, it listed a few open source, offline tools, NoScribe, Train, Buzz, that run locally on your own computer. Suggesting that could be a secure first step, keeping the audio data off external servers entirely for that stage.
Okay, so we've tackled the big three general concerns: bias, hallucination, and data security. But the material also gets really specific. It directly engages with some arguments researchers have apparently put forward for not using AI.
Yeah, this part is really interesting because it takes actual quotes or viewpoints people have expressed and then offers counterpoints, often showing it's based on maybe incomplete understanding.
Exactly.
Whispers, let's dive in. Qualitative flow, leading the way.
Let's dig into those. The first one highlighted in the material is framed like this: someone saying, effectively, look, I only accept an assistant I've trained myself or whose training I know inside out. AI vendors are cagey about their training data. That's not acceptable. The core issue is trust, transparency, knowing the assistant's background.
It's a really understandable feeling, right? You want to trust your tools, know where they come from. The material counters this by asking a practical question back. Okay, does this mean you have to train your own large language model?
Which is probably not feasible for most researchers.
Exactly. The material points out that training a full LLM from scratch takes many resources. Massive computing power, data measured in like billions or trillions of parameters is huge. Fine-tuning an existing model is much more realistic than building your own base model.
Right. You're not going to build GPT in your university lab. But the material does give some insight into what these big base models are generally trained on, doesn't it?
It does. It lists the typical kinds of data. Vast amounts of books, websites, scientific articles, Wikipedia, instructions, manuals, other online texts like blogs, newspapers.
Okay.
So while you don't get like a line-by-line list of every single web page you read,
Right.
this gives you a broad sense of the diverse general knowledge base the AI is built on. And the material presents this as context, sort of indirectly addressing that demand to know exactly what it was trained on by showing the types of sources.
Okay, got it. Next objection presented in the material. This one's about scientific value in citations. The argument goes, if an AI tool answered a research methods question correctly, like, what are the steps of inductive category formation? That answer would be scientifically worthless without proper citations. Publishing it would basically be plagiarism.
The academic integrity concern. Traceability. Makes sense. The material tackles this one really directly by showing an actual interaction with an AI.
Okay, what did they ask it?
It describes asking an AI assistant one with capabilities like GPT-4o the specific question. What are the steps of inductive category formation in qualitative content analysis, according to Philip Mehring?
And did the AI just spit out an unsourced, worthless answer?
But the material shows the AI did give a concise, accurate summary of Mehring's classic steps. But then, crucially, the user asked a follow-up. What are your sources?
And did it have any?
According to the material, yes. It listed specific, relevant academic sources, Mehring's 2023 book, his 2014 articles, even a Kuckert's book from 2014, and it apparently even noted relevant chapters or sections for some of them.
Wow, it cited actual academic literature.
That's what the interaction described shows, yeah. And when they push further, asking, how do you know that? The AI explained it uses its pre-trained general knowledge from texts it had access to, including academic work like Mehring's, combined with checking current public web sources.
So it's synthesizing what it learned and can point back to the knowledge base. How does the material then argue this isn't plagiarism or worthless?
It makes a few key points based on that interaction. First, the AI's answer was a summary, not just long-copied quotes. Second, basic facts or bibliographic details aren't usually protected by copyright. Third, even if the AI used a short verbatim, quote, copyright law, it mentions the German law, Section 51 URHG specifically, often allows for short quotes for analysis or reference, if cited.
Oh, okay.
So the material used this example to argue that, for this kind of summary task at least, the worry about worthlessness or plagiarism might be misplaced. The AI can provide synthesized info and can indicate its sources. It dismantles that specific concern.
That's a pretty strong counter, showing it in action. Okay, next specific reservation reported in the material. This one's about disagreement. Quote, ChatGPT did not provide results that matched our results. Only 2 of 6 categories matched. If my assistant disagreed, I'd discuss the specific text passages. With AI programs, this is not possible. So the core issue is you can't argue with it, you can't discuss differences.
This really hits at the heart of how qualitative analysis often works.
Yeah.
It's iterative, interpretive, and often involves hashing things out with team members or assistants when you see things differently.
Absolutely.
So the material tackles this by showing someone asking the AI assistant directly. Okay, if I ask you to do inductive category formation and you give me a result I don't agree with, can I actually discuss that with you?
And what did the AI say? Does it just give an error message?
Not at all, according to the material. It presents the AI's response as a very clear, yes, absolutely, that's exactly what I'm here for.
Really?
Yeah. And then the AI apparently described a process that sounds a lot like collaborative analysis. It suggested, okay, I give you a first suggestion, then we have a joint review where you point out disagreements, you clarify things, and I explain my reasoning how I think.
So the AI can explain its rationale, show its work, kind of.
That's the idea presented, yes. And then it suggests you can enter a revision and fine-tuning stage together, iteratively refining the categories. It even mentions things like validating against other text, documenting the final output, and maintaining transparency of decision paths, like keeping a log of the changes made during your discussion.
Wow.
And the material quotes the AI's conclusion. In short, you can discuss, reject, renegotiate, or deepen every step with me, just like in your team meetings, just asynchronously and as often as you like.
Okay, that directly smashes that reservation. The AI assistant, as presented there, is basically saying, no, I am built for that kind of back and forth. It suggests the limitation wasn't the tool's capability for discussion. Maybe it was how the user tried to interact with it initially.
Or maybe their expectation, yeah. It really highlights that effective interaction is more than just giving one command and expecting a final perfect result.
Definitely. Okay, one more specific objection from the material. This is the efficiency one. AI folks say you should check all the results, meaning you've basically analyzed everything yourself anyway. If I have to recalculate everything my calculator does, it's useless. So why bother with the AI assistant?
If it doesn't save me work, what's the point? Argument. Very practical.
Totally. If using AI means I still have to do the full manual analysis just to check it, it feels redundant.
Right. And the material's counterpoint here is crucial. Checking the AI's results doesn't necessarily mean doing the entire identical analysis manually yourself first and then comparing line by line.
Okay, what does it mean then?
It means critically reflecting on the AI assistant's output, engaging with it. You don't just accept it blindly, but you're also not necessarily just replicating the whole manual process from scratch. It's about critical review, not necessarily independent reanalysis of everything.
So critical thinking about the output, not just doing the same work twice.
Exactly. And the material uses that great analogy. With a coffee machine, you can't fry eggs.
I like that.
It emphasizes that these AI tools have specific functions and workflows they're good at. Trying to force them to perfectly replicate old processes that maybe only existed because there were no better solutions is likely why it feels like double work. You're using the new tool to mimic the constraints of the old way.
Like maybe trying to force the AI to code every single line meticulously like a human might have had to, instead of asking it to do something it's better suited for, like identifying broader concepts or summarizing themes based on criteria you set.
Precisely. The material also briefly touches on the fact that sometimes getting slightly different results from the exact same input. It mentions a coding agreement test, where an older model failed badly isn't necessarily a bug, but can be seen as a feature of generative AI. The real question becomes how to leverage that generative capability correctly and meaningfully within your research design. It even hints at potentially using LLMs as a kind of second coder in very specific technical environments. Though it notes this isn't straightforward with general tools like ChatGPT unless you segment the text carefully. But the main point is, adapt your workflow to the tool's actual nature.
That flows really nicely into this next point from the material that sometimes the problem isn't the AI at all, but maybe our expectations or how we're trying to interact with it. It gives examples of failed attempts stemming from what it calls false expectations.
Yeah, these examples are really instructive, I think. Learning moments.
Yeah.
One was someone asking an older model, ChatGPT 3.5, which the material notes was already outdated by the time this was reported,
Okay.
asking it to perform a complete qualitative content analysis following a specific complex method, all in one single prompt.
Then what happened?
The AI gave back steps, but from grounded theory instead, completely the wrong method.
Okay, so why did that fail so badly? Was it just the old model?
The material suggests that while the older model wasn't great, the prompt itself was fundamentally flawed, even for newer, better models. You were essentially asking the AI to conduct an entire complex multi-step research process, one that involves interpretation and feedback loops, all in a single command without any interaction.
Right. You can't just say, analyze all this data using Maring's method and expect a perfect final report to pop out.
Exactly. The material offers this really useful rule of thumb. Could you give this exact same instruction to a human colleague without allowing them to ask any follow-up questions?
Probably not for a complex analysis.
Right. And if the answer is no, you probably shouldn't give that instruction to an AI assistant either, expecting a good result. The AI will try to answer, bless its circuits, but without the ability to clarify or get feedback, the output is likely to be poor or misguided.
That's a fantastic way to frame it. Were there other examples of these false expectations?
Yeah, another one mentioned was an attempt to get ChatGPT to recognize a very specific psychoanalytic indicator, trying to get it to interpret a Freudian slip as a sign of repression. That failed too.
And the reason given?
The material suggests the AI simply needed way more context, more background information, more specific instruction to perform that kind of really nuanced, theory-heavy interpretation accurately. It wasn't given enough to work with.
Okay. And the third example?
Someone asked the AI for a list of categories that identified in some text, along with their frequencies. And the AI just ignored the frequency part.
Huh. Why would counting be hard for a computer? That seems counterintuitive.
Because the material explains very clearly. Large language models are fundamentally language processors, not calculating machines. Their strength is in understanding and generating text, identifying patterns in language. They're not built for reliable mathematical operations like counting frequencies accurately. Without being connected to a specific tool designed for calculation, like a Python interpreter or something similar, they just can't do it reliably. You're asking the coffee machine to fry eggs again.
Okay, so it's not just about writing simple prompts versus complex ones. It's really about understanding the tool's core capabilities and limitations and maybe breaking down tasks accordingly.
Exactly. The material briefly touches on more advanced prompting techniques, like chain of thought, where you guide the AI step by step, or how newer reasoning models might handle complex instructions better than older ones.
Yeah.
But the main takeaway on prompting seems to be, it's less about finding some secret perfect prompt formula,
Right.
and more about developing a general basic understanding of how these LLMs work and how to interact with them effectively. Learning from your own mistakes when using them is probably key to building that knowledge.
That really ties back to that assistant idea, doesn't it? You learn how to work with it. Speaking of limitations, the material also discusses the context window limit.
Ah, yes, the AI's short-term memory, essentially. It's the maximum amount of text, the prompt you give it, plus the document text it's looking at, that the AI can effectively process and kind of hold in its mind at one time when generating a response.
If your document or your request is longer than that window?
The AI effectively forgets the beginning part by the time it gets to the end. It can't see the whole picture at once.
The material gave some actual numbers for this, right?
It did. Older models, like ChatGPT 3.5, had a tiny window, maybe 96 tokens, which is only about 3 pages of text. Pretty limiting.
Very limiting.
Later models, like the ones in paid versions, boosted this significantly. Initially, maybe up to around 500 pages in theory, although the material cautions that the best, most accurate analysis still happens with smaller chunks. But the specific figure given for current models like GPT-4o is 128,000 tokens.
Oh, and that translates to?
Roughly 200 pages of text.
Okay, 200 pages. That sounds much more workable for research documents.
It's a huge improvement, definitely. And the material acknowledges that, 200 pages is pretty impressive compared to human working memory. Maybe not a reason to reject AI outright. However,
there's always a however.
There is. Yeah. It adds this crucial caveat. If you ask the AI a complex function across that entire 200-page chunk all at once, the answer you get back will likely be quite superficial.
Because it's trying to process too much simultaneously.
Kind of. The material suggests that asking the same question but applying it document by document, or maybe to smaller, more focused sections within that 200 pages, yields a much more detailed, nuanced answer. An answer that's really anchored in the specific data context of that smaller segment, rather than a kind of high-level, potentially fragmented summary across the whole massive chunk.
So it's another case of needing to adapt the workflow. Don't just dump 200 pages on it and expect magic. Work with it in manageable pieces.
Exactly. Trying to make it process huge chunks might just be trying to replicate how a human reads a whole book, which isn't necessarily how the AI's memory works best. Back to the coffee machine and eggs.
Right.
Okay, before we wrap up, the material also made a quick but helpful clarification about terminology. Because you hear ChatGPT thrown around constantly now.
Yeah, it points out that people often say ChatGPT when what they really mean is the underlying technology, the large language model itself, like GPT-4 or whatever model is being used.
And why is that distinction important for researchers using these tools?
Because when you use software like atlas.ti or MexQDA or others that have integrated AI features, they aren't necessarily just embedding the ChatGPT website or product wholesale. They're typically using the underlying LLM, a GPT model, perhaps via that secure API interface we discussed earlier.
Okay.
And the material notes these software developers don't have to use OpenAI's models. It specifically mentions that MXQDA, for instance, uses models from Google. So the specific AI engine, the features, the security protocols might vary quite a bit depending on the research software you choose. It's not all just using ChatGPT. That's a really practical point for anyone actually choosing or using these integrated tools. Good clarification. And finally, the material included just a brief mention of a real-world example, a tool addressing security.
Yeah, it mentioned QInsights as an example and listed some security features they promote. Things like adhering to industry standards, using double encryption, giving users control over data processing location, and ensuring compliance with a whole list of data protection regulations, GDPR, ISO standards, IPI, and others from Canada and Japan.
So basically showing that developers are actively working on building trust and addressing these security concerns in practice.
Exactly. It serves as a concrete example that these aren't just theoretical issues, solutions are being built.
Okay, so looking back at our mission for this deep dive, we've really unpacked those common reservations, haven't we? Bias, hallucination, data security. And we used the material to see how these concerns are being framed, how they're understood, and importantly, how they're being addressed technically with things like array systems and strong encryption, but also procedurally with things like confidentiality agreements.
And we also saw how many of those very specific objections people raise, the ones presented as quotes in the material, often seem to stem less from some fundamental failing of the AI itself.
Yeah.
And maybe more from insufficient knowledge about how these LLMs actually work, what they can and can't realistically do, and how to interact with them effectively to get useful results.
It really seems like the underlying message coming through is that using generative AI effectively in qualitative research involves a learning curve. You need to understand the tool's nature and, crucially, learn through trial and error how to interact with it.
Which brings us right back to that core question posed in the material. Is generative AI a tool or not a tool for qualitative research?
And given everything we've discussed, the technical solutions for things like hallucination and security, the demonstration that you can actually discuss results with the AI assistant, the emphasis on adapting expectations and how you prompt it, it really feels like the material is arguing the question should shift.
Shift from whether it's a tool.
Yeah, from if it's a tool to how you, the researcher, can learn to use it effectively as that assistant within your own specific research process.
Exactly. It puts the focus back on researcher skill, understanding, and adaptation. Maybe more than just saying the tool itself is inherently unsuitable.
So for you, our listener, thinking about your own work, or maybe conversations you've been part of, considering all these points from the material, what aspect of potentially working with AI as an assistant feels most challenging right now? Or perhaps what feels most promising to you after hearing this? Something to maybe mull over as you continue your own deep dives.
A key question for everyone navigating this rapidly changing landscape, for sure.
And that's our deep dive for today.
AI whispers, let's dive in. Qualitative flow, leading the way. whisper the tales in a digital sway.